Mia had always been the kind of child who blended into the background without even trying. She wasn't the loudest voice in the room, or the one who rushed to answer questions before anyone else. Instead, she preferred watching, listening, and keeping her thoughts quietly tucked inside her mind. It wasn't because she didn't have anything to say. She simply felt more comfortable observing the world around her than placing herself in the center of it. Her new school was bigger than the one she came from. The hallways seemed wider, the classrooms brighter, and the echoes of hundreds of students bouncing off the walls made everything feel louder. On her first morning, she walked in holding her backpack straps tightly, staying close to her mother as long as she could before the bell rang. When her mother hugged her goodbye, Mia smiled to show she was fine, even though her stomach felt heavy with nerves. When she stepped into her new classroom, she hoped no one would pay too much attention to her. She quietly found a seat near the side of the room. A few kids glanced at her, but most continued talking, laughing, or comparing the snacks they had brought. She didn't expect a warm welcome, but she also didn't feel unwelcomed. She simply felt invisible, which, to her, was more of a comfort than a problem. The teacher, Mrs. Rowan, stood at her desk reviewing some papers before the morning announcements. She looked like someone who appreciated order. Everything on her desk was neatly arranged, and her posture was straight, almost stiff. When she finally noticed Mia, she offered a quick smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "You must be the new student," she said. "Please stand up for a moment and introduce yourself." The room quieted slightly as Mia pushed herself up from her chair. Words didn't come easily to her when all eyes were suddenly on her. She gave a tiny wave and said softly, "My name is Mia." Her voice was barely louder than a whisper. A couple of students exchanged looks, but no one said anything. Mrs. Rowan nodded, though her expression suggested she expected more. "Welcome, Mia. You may sit." Mia sank back into her seat gratefully. She hoped that would be the last time she would have to speak in front of the class that day. As the hours passed, she tried to keep up with the lessons. Some things felt familiar, like the math problems and reading assignments. Other things were taught differently than at her old school, and she had to pay close attention. She listened carefully, but she still rarely raised her hand. She wasn't used to jumping into discussions, and the pace of the class made her nervous. Everyone else seemed to know one another already, chatting and joking during group work. Mia did her part quietly, not wanting to interrupt anyone's rhythm. During lunch, she took a seat at the edge of a long table. She unwrapped her sandwich and watched as kids moved around, trading snacks and choosing who to sit with. She didn't mind eating alone. She liked having time to think, and the noise around her felt almost like a busy soundtrack she could drift into. Still, she noticed the way a few students eyed her briefly before returning to their conversations. She wasn't sure if they were curious about her, or simply trying to figure out where she might fit. After lunch came music class. This room had a different energy from the rest of the school. Bright posters of instruments decorated the walls, and a large piano sat near the front. Mia's eyes lingered on it longer than she meant them to. Music had always been a part of her life, even if most people didn't know it. Her grandmother had taught her how to play the piano when she was very young. They used to sit together on the old bench at home, the wood slightly worn from years of use. Her grandmother's hands were gentle but precise as she guided her fingers along the keys. Those memories were among Mia's favorites, but she didn't tell people she played. Not because she was ashamed, far from it. It was simply something she held close to her heart. Something private. When the music teacher asked the class about instruments they had tried or wanted to learn, hands shot up everywhere. Students talked proudly about their talents or the lessons their parents had signed them up for. A few joked loudly about pretending to play guitar using broomsticks. The room buzzed with energy. Mia stayed quiet, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't want the attention that came with volunteering information about herself. She wasn't ready for anyone here to know anything personal about her. Across the room, a girl with a bright pink headband whispered to her friend, loud enough that Mia could hear, "She hasn't said a word all day. Maybe she doesn't know how to talk." Her friend giggled. "Maybe she's scared of school." Mia pretended not to hear, but the comment stung. She wasn't scared. She just didn't know how to show herself yet. When class ended and they returned to their main classroom, Mrs. Rowan seemed to notice something about Mia. Not something kind, but something like irritation. Throughout the day, the teacher had called on students to participate, share answers, or help explain lessons. She had asked Mia twice, and both times, Mia's responses were quiet and short. Not wrong, just quiet. To Mrs. Rowan, who preferred enthusiastic participation, that seemed like a problem. As the final bell neared, Mia's energy slowly drained. It had been a long day full of unfamiliar faces, new routines, and too many moments of being noticed when she didn't want to be. She packed her belongings neatly into her backpack, relieved the day was almost over. But as she zipped her bag, she felt someone's shadow fall over her desk. She looked up to see Mrs. Rowan standing there. "I noticed you've been very quiet today," the teacher said, her tone not unfriendly, but certainly not gentle. "You're going to have to speak up more, Mia. Participation is important in this classroom." Mia nodded quickly. "I'll try," she said softly. "Good," Mrs. Rowan replied, though she didn't look convinced. She walked away to dismiss the rest of the class. Mia walked out of the building with slow steps. She wasn't upset, but she felt a heavy pressure in her chest. She wondered if tomorrow would be better, or if she would still feel like an outsider. On the ride home, she looked out the window, watching the passing houses and trees blur together. She thought about the piano at school. It looked almost identical to her grandmother's old one. She wondered if she would ever get the chance to play it, not for attention, but simply for the comfort it brought her. Her grandmother always said music had a way of revealing who a person truly was, even when words couldn't. Mia wasn't sure she wanted her new classmates or teacher to see that part of her. Not yet. Maybe one day, but not now. At home, she dropped her backpack near the door and went straight to the living room where her family piano sat. Its familiar shape eased her nerves. She sat down and lifted the fall board, brushing her fingers lightly over the cool keys. She took a slow breath and started playing a simple tune, letting the melody wash away everything she had felt at school. The notes were soft but steady, filling the room with warmth. Her mother peeked in from the kitchen, smiling quietly before returning to her cooking. This was their routine, Mia's way of settling her thoughts at the end of each day. As she played, she wondered again what tomorrow would bring. She hoped she would feel a little braver, a little more ready to talk. But she also knew some things took time, and Mia wasn't in a hurry. She simply needed space to grow into her new world. For now, she would stay quiet, observe, and listen. She would learn the rhythms of her new classroom, the same way she learned the rhythm of a new song, slowly, patiently, and with care. She didn't know it yet, but the quiet strength she held inside her would soon become impossible for others to ignore. And one day, the piano that sat untouched in her classroom would change everything. Mia woke up the next morning, wishing she could stay in bed just a little longer. She had slept, but her mind never fully relaxed. Thoughts of the previous day lingered, especially the moments when she felt eyes on her, or when her quiet voice seemed to disappoint the teacher. Still, morning came, and with it the need to face another day at her new school. Her mother gently knocked on the door. "Time to get up," she said in a soft voice. Mia nodded, even though her mother couldn't see her. She pushed away her blanket and dressed slowly. She chose her favorite sweater, not because she wanted people to notice it, but because its softness made her feel calm. She brushed her hair carefully, tied her shoelaces, and grabbed her backpack. Breakfast was quiet, which Mia liked. Her parents didn't push her with questions about school. They knew she would speak when she felt ready. Her father simply placed a small apple in her lunchbox and said, "Hope today feels easier." It wasn't a big statement, but it warmed her heart. On the way to school, Mia watched the sky slowly brighten. She tried to convince herself that maybe today would be different. Maybe she would feel a little braver, or maybe no one would stare at her. But the uneasy feeling in her stomach stayed. When she walked into the building, the familiar noise returned. Children rushing, laughing, calling out to each other. It all felt like a wave she had to walk against. When she reached her classroom, she took a quiet breath before stepping inside. Some students were already there. A few looked up when she entered, but just as quickly returned to their conversations. Mia found her seat from yesterday and sat down, placing her bag neatly at her feet. She tried to focus on arranging her notebook and pencils. A boy sitting 2 rows ahead was telling a group of classmates a story about his dog, waving his arms around dramatically. They laughed loudly at every part, even before he finished. Mia watched quietly. She wished she could speak with that same confidence, but speaking in front of others felt like stepping into cold water. Soon, Mrs. Rowan entered the room. She greeted the class with a practiced smile and asked everyone to settle down. When her gaze swept across the room, it lingered a moment longer on Mia. The teacher didn't say anything, but Maya could feel the expectation hanging there. The morning lessons went by slowly. Mia completed her worksheets carefully, double-checking her answers. She didn't want to draw attention by making mistakes. Each time Mrs. Rowan asked a question to the class, hands shot up all around Mia. She knew some answers, but she didn't raise her hand. Her voice still felt locked behind a wall. Near the middle of the morning, Mrs. Rowan suddenly called her name. "Mia, can you read the next sentence for us?" The room grew quieter. Mia felt heat rise to her cheeks. She looked down at the page, trying to steady her breath. The sentence wasn't hard, but her throat tightened anyway. She read it slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. A few students in the back frowned, leaning closer as if trying to hear her better. When she finished, she kept her eyes on her desk. Mrs. Rowan paused before speaking. "Please try to project your voice next time. The class needs to hear you." Mia nodded, though she knew her voice wouldn't magically grow louder by tomorrow. The rest of the class moved on, but the moment stayed with her. She felt as if she were shrinking into her chair, wishing she could disappear for just a little while. During recess, she found a bench away from the groups forming on the playground. Kids ran back and forth, shouting and chasing each other. Others gathered in circles, talking about games, shows, or weekend plans. Mia watched them with a quiet curiosity. She didn't feel lonely, exactly, but she wondered what it would be like to join them. As she sat, she opened her lunchbox and took a small bite of her snack. She didn't mind the quiet. It was better than feeling overwhelmed. But even in the distance, she heard a pair of voices, familiar ones. "That's the new girl, right?" One of them said, "Yeah," another replied. "She's so quiet. I thought she'd talk today, but she didn't." Mia kept her eyes down. She didn't want anyone to think she was listening. Recess eventually ended, and the students gathered back inside. Mia followed the crowd, staying near the edge where she felt safest. The afternoon brought music class again. Yesterday had been noisy and full of high energy, and today didn't seem any different. Students crowded around their friends, chatting about the instruments hanging on the wall. The music teacher, Mr. Dawson, clapped his hands to get everyone's attention. "Settle down, everyone. Today we're going to talk about rhythm and teamwork." He paired students up to clap simple patterns together. Mia found herself standing next to a girl who didn't introduce herself. She just glanced at Mia Unsurely before focusing on the pattern the teacher demonstrated. Mia followed along quietly. She knew the rhythm easily. It was simple and steady. But her partner kept missing the beat and growing frustrated. "You're going too fast," the girl said with a sigh. Mia shook her head lightly. She wasn't going fast. She was matching the teacher exactly. But she didn't argue. She just slowed down until they were finally in sync. When the exercise ended, the girl walked off without saying anything. Mia tried not to let it bother her. She wasn't expecting friendship to bloom immediately. As the class wrapped up, the students gathered near the piano again, some touching the keys playfully, even though they weren't supposed to. The bright pink headband girl from the day before pointed at the instrument and giggled with her friend. "Imagine if she tried to play this," she whispered, nodding toward Mia. "She'd probably break it with how nervous she is." The friend snickered. Mia kept her gaze on the floor, pretending not to notice. She didn't feel angry, just tired. Maybe they didn't mean harm. They just didn't understand her. But that didn't make the words any easier to hear. When the class returned to their main room, the atmosphere felt heavier for Mia. She walked slowly, wishing she could find a quiet corner to hide in for the rest of the day. Mrs. Rowan seemed more tense than usual. She kept glancing at Mia during discussions, as if expecting anything from her. Each glance felt like a small push. At one point, when the class was talking about a story they had read, a student confidently shared his opinion. Mrs. Rowan praised his enthusiasm before turning her eyes toward Mia again. "What about you?" she asked. "What do you think the story is trying to teach?" The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at her. Mia felt frozen. She knew the answer. She had written a full paragraph about it in her notebook earlier. But speaking it aloud felt impossible with so many eyes waiting, expecting. She opened her mouth slightly, but no sound came out at first. After a few seconds, she managed to whisper, "Maybe it means we should be kind." Her voice trembled. Mrs. Rowan nodded, but didn't look satisfied. "You need to be more confident. You're capable of more than this." It wasn't meant to be harsh, but it felt harsh anyway. The final hour of the school day dragged on. Mia felt drained, as if each attempt to speak had taken a piece of her energy. She kept her head down, finishing her work quietly. When the bell finally rang, she let out a small breath of relief. Students rushed out happily, talking about their after-school plans. Mia packed slowly, hoping to slip out unnoticed. But halfway to the door, she heard Mrs. Rowan's voice. "Mia, stay for a moment." Her heart sank a little. She turned and walked back to the teacher's desk. Mrs. Rowan sighed, folding her hands together. "I know you're new, and I understand it can be hard to adjust. But you need to try harder to participate. You can't stay this quiet forever." Mia looked down. "I'm trying," she whispered. "I hope so," Mrs. Rowan replied, though her tone carried doubt. "We'll work on this." Mia nodded and quickly left the room. On her way home, her steps were slower than yesterday. The weight in her chest felt heavier. She wondered why her quietness bothered people so much. She wasn't trying to be difficult. She was simply herself. At home, she went to the piano immediately. Her fingers pressed the keys gently at first, then more confidently as the melody grew. Music didn't judge her. It didn't tell her to be louder, braver, or different. It simply let her be. As the notes filled the room, some of the tension in her body melted away. She felt steady again, grounded. She didn't know it yet, but tomorrow would push her further than she expected. And the quiet girl no one understood would soon reveal something none of them saw coming. For now, she let the music soothe her. She needed it maybe more than ever. Mia woke up the next day with a feeling she couldn't quite explain. It wasn't excitement, and it wasn't sadness either. It was something in between a nervous heaviness that sat quietly in her chest. She dressed slowly, tying her shoes with an extra loop just so they wouldn't come undone on her walk to school. She looked at herself in the mirror and whispered a small reminder, just get through the day. Her mother handed her breakfast, asking if she slept well. Mia nodded, though she hadn't slept deeply. Her mind had replayed yesterday again and again, the soft voice, the stairs, the teacher's sigh. She hoped today would pass quietly, without any moments that left her feeling exposed. The school building looked bigger than usual as she approached it. Maybe it was because she knew what waited inside. The same noisy halls, the same unfamiliar faces. She breathed in slowly and stepped inside. The classroom was already half full. Students were talking loudly, swapping stories about what they watched on television, or funny things their siblings did. Mia slipped to her seat. She didn't expect anyone to greet her, but she still felt a small sting when no one even glanced in her direction. She wasn't sure if being unnoticed was good or bad. She only knew she was used to it as she unpacked her things. She saw Mrs. Rowan at the front of the room, flipping through papers. The teacher's expression already looked slightly irritated, though Mia couldn't tell if it had anything to do with her. She hoped not. When class began, the teacher reviewed a lesson from the day before. Students raised their hands, eager to answer. Mia knew several of the responses, but she kept her hand down. She didn't want to become the center of attention, not again. But halfway through the lesson, Mrs. Rowan called on her anyway. Mia, can you explain what the main character learned? Her chest tightened. She picked at the edge of her notebook as she spoke. They learned to be patient. Her voice was soft, but steady enough. Louder, please, Mrs. Rowan said. Mia tried again, raising her voice just a little. They learned to be patient. A student in the back murmured, I still can't hear her. Another laughed. Mia looked down, wishing the floor would swallow her up. Mrs. Rowan sighed. You must speak clearly. This can't continue. Mia nodded, though every part of her felt smaller. As the lesson continued, she felt the weight of those words pressing down on her. She wasn't trying to be difficult. Her voice simply didn't rise the way others did. When recess arrived, she walked outside quietly and sat on her usual bench. She watched other children run and yell happily. Their energy filled the air like bright colors. But Mia's world felt muted, like a watercolor painting left in the rain. She opened her lunchbox and took tiny bites of her sandwich. For a moment, she imagined she was somewhere else, at her grandmother's house, playing the piano with the sun streaming through the windows. Music always made everything lighter, but reality pulled her back when she heard a group of kids talking nearby. Why is she always alone? One asked. Maybe she doesn't know how to play with people. Another replied. Or maybe she's just weird, someone added. Their words weren't shouted, but they carried clearly enough that Mia turned her gaze toward the ground. She didn't want to cry, not here, not where people could see. She swallowed the sadness rising in her chest and took a slow breath. She told herself the same thing she always did. They don't know me. They don't know anything about me. Recess ended, and the students filed inside. This time, something felt different in the air. Mia didn't know why, but she sensed it. When the class returned to their seats, Mrs. Rowan stood near the front with a firm expression. Today, we are going to do something a little different, she announced. Students leaned forward eagerly. We are going to spend the last part of the afternoon sharing talents or skills we have. Chorus of excited whispers filled the room. Mia felt her stomach twist. She didn't want to perform anything. She wanted to disappear. One student raised his hand. Do we have to share something? No, Mrs. Rowan said. Only if you want to. Relief washed over me until she saw the way the teacher's eyes flicked toward her briefly. She quickly looked away. Students began volunteering. One girl showed a drawing. Another boy demonstrated a silly dance, and others shared jokes or tricks. The room buzzed with laughter and applause. Mia sat quietly, smiling politely at every performance, even though her heart pounded nervously, for reasons she didn't quite understand. Then, just as the excitement began to settle, a voice from the middle of the room spoke up. "What about the new girl?" Mia froze. The girl with the pink headband had her hand raised. She should show something too. A few students nodded, whispering in agreement. Mia shook her head quickly. "I don't have anything," she whispered, but the classroom erupted with chatter. "She has to do something." Someone shouted, "Yeah, everyone else did." Mia's breathing quickened. She wished the noise would stop. Mrs. Rowan raised her hand for silence. "Enough." She said she doesn't want to. Mia felt a tiny wave of gratitude until the teacher spoke again. "But, Mia," she said with a tight smile, "I think it would be good for you. You've been so quiet all week. Maybe sharing something small will help you open up." Mia shook her head again, her voice barely escaping. "I don't want to." But Mrs. Rowan didn't step back this time. Instead, she looked around the room, then at the piano sitting in the corner. "You mentioned yesterday that you know about rhythm," she said. "Why don't you go to the piano and show us a simple tune?" Mia's heart dropped. She hadn't said anything about knowing rhythm. She had simply followed instructions. But the teacher seemed determined. Before Mia could protest again, Mrs. Rowan clapped her hands. "Class, let's give her some encouragement." The room filled with forced cheers. Mia felt trapped like a bird pushed from a branch before it was ready to fly. Slowly, she stood. Her legs felt heavy, almost as if they didn't want to move. She walked toward the piano, one small step at a time. Some students whispered loudly, "She's going to mess up. She's too scared to play. What if she hits the wrong notes?" Someone in the back even snickered, "This should be funny." Mia's hands trembled. Her throat tightened. She didn't want this attention. Not like this. Mrs. Rowan stood behind her, arms crossed, waiting. "Go on," she said. "Show us what you can do." Mia stared at the piano keys. They looked different from the ones at home, even though they were the same shape and color. These keys belonged to a place where she felt watched, judged, misunderstood. She lifted her hands slowly. Unsure if she could even press a single note, her fingers hovered over the keys. The room was silent, too silent. She thought of her grandmother, the gentle guidance, the warm smile, the patient hands. She remembered the comfort she always felt when playing. She remembered why she loved it, but this moment felt nothing like that. It felt like standing alone on a stage with no safety net. Mrs. Rowan tapped her foot impatiently. "Any time now?" Mia swallowed hard. She didn't know what would happen if she played. Would they laugh? Would she freeze? Would she embarrass herself even more? Her fingers rested softly on the keys. For a moment, everything in her wanted to run, but running wasn't an option. Not now. Quiet breath escaped her lips. She pressed her first note. The sound was soft. Almost uncertain. Students leaned forward. Mrs. Rowan's expression remained stern. Mia took another breath. Her hands moved again. One note, then another. And another. The melody was forming. It wasn't loud. It wasn't showy, but something was waking inside her. A piece of her that had been silent for too long. A piece waiting for the right moment to be heard. And even though she didn't know it yet, every single person in that room was about to witness something they would never forget. The morning of the next school day seemed brighter than usual, though the sky was still cloudy and the air cool enough to make people wrap their arms around themselves. But inside the classroom, there was a warmth that did not come from sunlight or heaters. It came from the way people looked at the little girl now. They did not see the quiet student who sat in the back, always keeping her eyes on her notebook. They did not see someone who avoided attention. They saw someone who had surprised everyone with a talent that none of them had expected. Even before she sat down, a few classmates whispered to one another. Some smiled at her in a friendly way, which was new for her. Usually she slipped in quietly, hoping to blend into the room without anyone noticing. But now, eyes followed her with a kind of curiosity that made her heart beat faster. She kept her head low as she walked to her desk. She did not want to look like she enjoyed the attention, even though a small part of her felt proud. But mostly she was nervous. She wondered what the teacher would say. She wondered whether the teacher was upset about what happened during music class the day before. She wondered whether the teacher felt embarrassed. She wondered if the teacher planned to ignore her, or maybe even scold her privately. She sat down carefully, opened her book, and took out her pencil. Her hands felt a little shaky. She tried to focus on her breathing, taking slow breaths like her mother often told her to do when she felt anxious. As the classroom filled up and students took their places, the noise grew louder. Then the door opened, and everyone turned. The teacher entered the room with a neutral expression, holding a stack of papers. Nothing in her face showed what she felt about yesterday. She walked to her desk, set the papers down, and greeted the class in her usual calm voice. The lesson began, and for a while it seemed like everything was normal. But the girl could still feel her teacher's eyes on her from time to time. Not in a harsh or angry way, but in a thoughtful way. Like the teacher wanted to understand something but wasn't sure how to approach it. The girl kept her eyes on her notebook, trying to stay focused, but the weight of that attention made her uneasy. During break, a few students approached her. 2 classmates asked if she had learned piano for a long time. Another said they had told their parents about her performance because it was so beautiful. One of the boys who usually didn't talk to her said something like, "You're really good." Like really, really good. She didn't know how to respond to so many people at once. She just gave small smiles and answered in short sentences. A girl from the front row, someone who usually raised her hand often and answered questions loudly, came over too. She said she wanted to learn piano someday and asked the little girl if she could give tips. The girl didn't know how to give tips. She had never taught anyone anything before, so she simply said she could try to explain what she knew. And the other girl nodded excitedly when break ended and everyone returned to their seats. The teacher stood by the window for a moment before starting the lesson. She stared outside, her arms crossed loosely, as though thinking about something. Then she turned to the class and began speaking. Her voice sounded calm, but there was a slight heaviness to it, a seriousness. She talked about the importance of respecting classmates, about not judging someone before understanding them, about giving everyone a fair chance. She didn't mention the piano or the incident directly, but everyone knew what she was referring to. While she spoke, the girl felt her cheeks warm. She didn't know if she should feel embarrassed or relieved. The teacher wasn't scolding anyone, but she was making a point the whole class seemed to understand. The teacher continued the lesson as usual, but her eyes didn't linger as long on the girl anymore. It felt like she had already said what she needed to say without singling anyone out. The girl felt a small sense of comfort from that. Later, during lunch, she sat in her usual corner of the schoolyard. She liked sitting under the tree because it felt peaceful, and she could listen to the wind rustle the leaves above her. Today, though, she wasn't alone for long. The same girl who had asked for piano tips earlier approached and sat next to her without asking. She opened her lunchbox and began eating, chatting about small things, homework, the cafeteria food, a show she watched the night before. The little girl nodded and listened, occasionally replying. She wasn't used to someone sitting with her unless it was a group activity, and she didn't know how to keep a long conversation going. But this girl talked enough for both of them, and somehow it didn't feel uncomfortable. After a while, the girl shyly asked again about learning piano. She said she didn't have a piano at home, but her aunt had a small keyboard she might borrow. She wanted to know if the little girl had always been good at it. The girl shook her head. She explained that she had learned because her grandfather used to play old songs at home. She would sit next to him on the bench and copy what he did. At first, she pressed all the wrong notes and made terrible sounds, but he always smiled and encouraged her. He told her that the piano wasn't something to be afraid of, but something that could speak when words couldn't. Her new friend listened with big, curious eyes. She said it sounded beautiful, the idea of learning with someone so patient. The girl nodded softly, remembering those warm afternoons by the window at home. The rest of the school day moved slowly. During the last period, the teacher asked everyone to hand in a small reflection they had written earlier in the week. As the students turned in their papers, the teacher paused when the girl placed hers on top of the pile. She looked at her for a moment and gave a small nod that felt almost like an apology, though no words were spoken. When the final bell rang, the girl packed up her things and walked toward the door. Before she reached it, the teacher called her name gently. Not loudly, not sharply. Just a soft call asking her to wait. The girl turned around and walked back to the teacher's desk. The classroom was empty now, except for the two of them. The teacher leaned against the desk, her hands folded in front of her. She said she had been thinking a lot about yesterday. She admitted she had made a quick judgment instead of giving the girl time to show what she could do. She said she felt embarrassed because teachers were supposed to set examples, and she hadn't done that. The girl listened quietly. She didn't know what to say. She didn't hold any anger, and she didn't expect the teacher to say sorry. She simply nodded. The teacher asked how long she had been practicing piano. The girl told her about her grandfather again, though only in short pieces. The teacher smiled softly and said she hoped the girl would continue playing and maybe even join the school music club someday. The girl didn't know if she was brave enough for that, but she thanked the teacher anyway. On her way home, the girl walked with lighter steps. She felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, like maybe she didn't have to always hide the things she loved. Maybe people would accept them. Maybe she could even make a friend or two. But that good feeling didn't last long, because the moment she reached home, the house felt strangely silent. Her mother wasn't in the kitchen, and the living room lights were off. Usually, her mother waited by the window when the girl came home from school. Today, the curtains were still. She called out softly, but there was no answer. The feeling that washed over her chest was cold and heavy. She placed her backpack on the floor and stepped cautiously toward the living room. When she turned the corner, she found her mother sitting on the couch with a letter in her hands. Her mother's eyes were red and swollen, as though she had been crying for a long time. The girl froze. A terrible thought filled her mind. Something must be very wrong. Her mother looked up at her, forcing a small, weak smile. She told her they needed to talk, but her voice trembled. The girl's heart began to pound again, harder than it had at school. She walked slowly toward the couch, afraid of what she was about to hear. And when her mother finally explained, the girl felt the ground shift beneath her. Nothing in her life would be the same now, and the talent that had brought her unexpected attention at school would soon become part of a much bigger story, one that she never imagined she would have to face. The girl stood frozen in the middle of the living room as her mother tried to gather herself enough to speak. The house felt too quiet, as though the air itself was holding its breath. Her mother carefully folded the letter and placed it on the coffee table, her hands trembling so much that she had to take a slow breath to steady them. The girl had never seen her mother like this, not even on bad days, not even when things were hard. Her mother always tried to stay strong for her. But today, the strength seemed gone. She finally managed to speak, her voice soft and uneven. She explained that the letter came from the company where she worked. They were making changes, and several people were losing their jobs. Her mother was one of them. The girl felt her heart drop. She knew how hard her mother worked, how many late nights she stayed up doing extra tasks, how she always said they just needed to be patient and things would get better. But now, everything felt uncertain. Her mother tried to smile, saying they would figure things out. She said they always did. But the girl could see the fear behind her mother's eyes, the kind of fear adults try to hide so children don't worry. The girl sat down beside her and held her mother's hand. They stayed like that for a while, not talking, just holding on to each other, because it was the only comforting thing in the room. As the evening went on, her mother made tea, even though neither of them felt like drinking it. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the cup in her hands. The girl sat across from her, unsure of what to say or do. She wished she could make everything better, but she was just a child. She didn't have answers. She didn't have solutions. Her mother eventually shook herself from her thoughts and tried to talk about simple things: dinner, homework, plans for the weekend. But each topic fell flat. Her voice would trail off, and she would stare into the distance again. The girl ate quietly, every bite feeling heavier than the last. That night, sleep would not come easily. The girl lay awake, listening to the soft sound of her mother pacing the living room. Occasionally, she heard drawers opening and paper rustling. Her mother was probably making lists like she always did, lists of bills, lists of groceries, lists of ways to stretch whatever money they had left. The girl closed her eyes and tried to imagine that everything would be okay. She imagined her mother smiling like before. She imagined the house filled with laughter again. But the more she tried, the more her chest tightened. The next morning, her mother looked tired as she packed the girl's lunch. She forced a smile and said the girl should focus on school and not worry too much. But children always sense the truth, even when adults try to hide it. The girl nodded, though she felt a knot in her stomach the whole way to school. Things felt different at school, too, even though nothing had changed there. Her classmates greeted her like usual, a few still talking about her piano performance. But her mind was somewhere else. She couldn't concentrate during lessons. Words in her book blurred together. Her teacher noticed she was distracted and asked if everything was okay. The girl nodded quickly, not wanting to talk about it. During lunch, the friend who sat with her before noticed her silence. She asked if something was wrong. The girl hesitated, unsure if she should share something so personal. But her friend's expression was kind, and for a moment, the girl felt safe enough to speak. She explained quietly that her mother had lost her job. Her friend's face softened instantly. She didn't ask questions. She didn't push. She simply said she was sorry, and that she hoped things would get better. It was a small comfort. But it helped. After school, the girl walked home slowly, not wanting to face the heavy silence of the house again. She took the long route, passing by the small park near their street. She sat on a bench for a while, watching other kids play. Their laughter floated through the air, bright and carefree. It felt like a different world, one she wasn't part of at that moment. When she finally reached home, her mother was sitting at the table with a pile of documents spread out in front of her. She looked up and tried to smile, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. The girl set her backpack down and sat next to her. Her mother explained that they might need to be more careful with money for a while. She said it gently, choosing her words carefully, trying not to make it sound scary. But the truth was still there, unspoken but heavy. They might need to cut back on things. They might need to make decisions that neither of them wanted to make. The girl nodded, trying to be strong. She asked how long it would take for her mother to find another job. Her mother sighed and said she didn't know. The girl didn't know what else to say. Later in the evening, the girl sat at the old piano her grandfather had given them. She ran her fingers over the keys, feeling their cool surface. She didn't play at first. She just sat there, listening to the quiet. Her mother walked in, pausing in the doorway. She asked softly if the girl wanted to play something. The girl hesitated. She didn't know if playing would make anything better, but she also knew that music had always brought comfort to both of them. So she placed her fingers on the keys and began, playing the simple melody her grandfather had taught her long ago, the same one she always played. When she needed calm, her mother closed her eyes and leaned against the wall, listening. The melody filled the room, soft yet warm. For the first time that day, the tightness in the girl's chest eased a little. When she finished, her mother wiped her eyes quietly. She walked over and placed her hand on the girl's shoulder. She told her that things might be difficult for a while, but they would face it together. She reminded her that they had overcome many things before, and they would overcome this too. The girl nodded, feeling tears in her eyes, but not letting them fall. The days that followed were slow and uncertain. Her mother made phone calls, sent applications, and went to interviews. Some companies didn't respond. Some said they weren't hiring. Her mother tried to stay positive, but each rejection made her shoulders droop a little more. The girl did her best to help. She took on more chores at home. She tried not to ask for anything unnecessary. She studied harder, hoping to avoid giving her mother anything else to worry about. But deep down, she felt worried every single day. One afternoon, her teacher pulled her aside gently after class. She said she had noticed the girl seemed tired and distracted. She asked again if something was wrong. This time, the girl admitted the truth. Her teacher listened quietly, her expression full of concern. The teacher reminded her that she didn't have to carry everything alone. She said it was okay to feel overwhelmed. She offered to help with schoolwork if the girl ever needed extra support. She also encouraged her to keep playing piano because it was something that brought her peace. The girl appreciated the words more than she expected. Even though she didn't say much in return, hearing someone acknowledge her struggle made her feel less alone. As weeks passed, things didn't improve right away, but there were small glimmers of hope. Her mother received a call for another interview, one she felt more confident about. She prepared carefully, ironing her clothes, reviewing the information, practicing her answers. The morning of the interview, she hugged the girl tightly and told her she would do her best. The girl wished her good luck, feeling a mixture of fear and hope. After school, the girl raced home faster than she had in weeks. She found her mother sitting at the table, waiting. This time, her mother's eyes were brighter. She stood up and hugged the girl tightly, whispering that the interview had gone well. They would hear back in a few days. The girl felt a spark of hope that warmed her whole body. Maybe things would get better. Maybe they were already starting to. But even as she held on to that hope, she couldn't shake the feeling that the story she was living was far from over. Something bigger was ahead, something she didn't fully understand yet. And soon, everything that had happened at school and at home would come together in a way she never expected. The morning the girl woke up, she felt something different in the air. It was not something she could explain easily, but it felt like a quiet shift, as though the world was holding something new just out of sight. She reached for her socks, slipped them on, and walked to the kitchen where her mother was, already preparing breakfast. Her mother turned with a small smile that looked more real than the ones she had forced in the past weeks. She set a plate on the table and told the girl to eat before her food got cold. The girl sat down and watched her mother for a moment. There was a softness in her eyes, a lightness in the way she moved. Something was different. After a long pause, her mother finally told her. The company she had interviewed with had called her early that morning. She got the job. The girl froze. A warm rush spread through her chest, pushing away the heavy worry that had lived there for so long. Her mother laughed quietly, almost in disbelief, and wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She said it wasn't a perfect job, and it wasn't exactly what she had hoped for, but it was something steady, something that would help them breathe again. The girl stood and hugged her mother tightly, her arms wrapped around her, as though she never wanted to let go. They stayed like that for a moment, both relieved, both grateful. That day at school felt lighter. The problems that had once filled her mind now seemed a little smaller. She felt more awake, more present in class. Her teacher noticed and smiled at her as she walked in. Her classmates waved, and even though the girl still felt shy, she smiled back. During break, her friend rushed to her side and asked why she looked so happy. The girl shared the news, and her friend bounced excitedly, saying she was glad things were getting better. But even with the good news at home, another part of her life was slowly shifting quietly, without her fully noticing. Over the next few days, her teacher began encouraging her more during music class. Not in an overwhelming way, not in a way that made her nervous. It was simply small things, asking her opinion about a song, letting her choose which warm-up the class practiced, or asking her to help a classmate with a few notes dotted first. She felt awkward, unsure if she deserved that kind of attention. But the more she helped, the more she began to believe she was capable of it. One afternoon, the teacher called her aside after class. She told the girl that the school was planning a small event, a quiet gathering for parents and teachers. Nothing too big, and they needed a student to play a short piece on the piano. She said the girl didn't have to do it if she didn't want to, but she believed the girl had something special. The girl felt her stomach twist. She wasn't sure she was ready for something like that. Playing in front of her classmates was one thing. Playing in front of parents and teachers was another. But she also remembered how proud her mother looked when she played at home. She remembered her grandfather's warm voice telling her that music was a gift to share, not hide. She took a slow breath and agreed. The teacher smiled and assured her they would choose something simple and calming, something she felt comfortable with. The girl nodded, still nervous, but also a little excited. That evening, when she told her mother hugged her tightly and said she would be there, no matter what. The girl could tell her mother was genuinely happy, not just pretending. The next week passed in a blur of schoolwork, practice, and small moments of encouragement from people around her. The teacher let her practice in the music room after class, making sure the room stayed quiet and peaceful so she could focus. Sometimes her friend would sit nearby, listening quietly, offering a smile at the end of each practice. Each day, the melody grew smoother. Each day, her confidence grew a little stronger. But even with the progress, she couldn't help feeling nervous. She wondered if she would mess up. She wondered if people would lose interest or judge her. She wondered if she would disappoint her mother. The night before the event, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the things that could go wrong. She finally sat up and tiptoed quietly to the living room. She lifted the piano cover and let her fingers hover over the keys. She didn't play loudly. She didn't play the whole piece. She just pressed a few notes gently, letting the soft sound float through the dark room. She closed her eyes and imagined her grandfather beside her, smiling with the same warmth he always had. She imagined him saying the words he used to say, telling her that music wasn't about perfection. It was about feeling. When she finally went back to bed, the notes lingered in her mind, like a soft blanket wrapping around her. The morning of the event arrived quickly. The school buzzed with activity. Parents walked through the halls, teachers guided them toward classrooms, and students carried posters or helped set things up. The girl stayed near the doorway of the music room, clutching her hands together. Her mother arrived a little later, her eyes bright and full of encouragement. She hugged the girl gently, whispering that she was proud of her no matter what happened. When it was finally her turn to play, the girl walked to the piano slowly, feeling the room grow still. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and took a deep breath. Her fingers trembled as they touched the keys. For a moment, she forgot the notes. Her mind went blank. The room seemed too quiet. But then she remembered the feeling of the keys beneath her fingers at home, the soft voice of her grandfather, and the warm smile of her mother sitting in the audience. She pressed the first note. The sound was gentle, almost shy. Then another note followed, and another. The melody began to form, smooth and calm, filling the room with a soft warmth. The girl kept her eyes on the keys, letting the music guide her. Her hands moved steadily, each note clearer and more confident than the last. The room was silent, except for the sound of the piano. Even people who had been fidgeting earlier sat still. Some leaned forward slightly, listening. A teacher in the back closed her eyes. A few parents smiled. The girl didn't look up until the very end. When the last note faded, she lifted her hands and let the silence settle. She finally lifted her eyes. Her teacher was smiling. Her classmates were smiling. Her friend was clapping. But the person she looked for first was her mother. Her mother's eyes were shining with tears she didn't try to hide. She clapped slowly, her smile wide and full of love. The girl felt her heart swell with relief and joy, emotions she had held back for too long. After the event, several parents came forward to compliment her. Some said the music was beautiful. Others said it was calming. Her teacher placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and told her she had done wonderfully. Her mother hugged her tightly outside the music room. She whispered that everything they had gone through, the hard days, the long nights, the fear, felt a little lighter now. The girl hugged her back, holding on to the warmth in her mother's voice. They walked home together, talking softly about the event. Her mother held her hand, something she hadn't done in a long time, because the girl was getting older. But today, it felt right when they reached home. Her mother made a simple dinner, and they ate together while talking about the future. Things were still uncertain, but they didn't feel impossible anymore. They had hope, something they had nearly lost. Later, the girl sat at the piano again. She didn't play the same piece. Instead, she pressed a few new notes, trying to create something on her own. It felt strange, but exciting, like discovering a small part of herself she hadn't known before. Her mother leaned in the doorway, smiling softly. She told the girl that she was proud, not because she performed well, but because she had been brave enough to try. The girl looked at her mother and realized she felt something new too. She felt stronger. She felt lighter. She felt like she wasn't just the quiet girl who sat in the back of the classroom. Anymore, she felt like someone who could face things, even when they were scary, someone who could grow, someone who could shine in her own gentle way. And as her fingers continued to explore the keys, she felt certain that this was only the beginning of her story. The world was wide, and her music had a place in it, maybe small, maybe simple, but hers, and that was enough to fill the room with warmth.